The train coughed black smoke into a sky bruised with cloud, and when it finally hissed to a stop at Bitterbrush Station, not a soul stood waiting on the platform. Etta Bell stepped down with one hand clutching her valise and the other tight at her ribs, where a cough had lived since Kentucky. The conductor gave her a pitying glance, tipped his cap, and muttered something about the coming frost. Then he climbed back aboard, and the train pulled away, leaving Etta in the silence of the Wyoming Territory. She was small, too small by most standards, thin as willow bark and pale as linen left too long in the sun. The wind lifted her skirts and made her shiver. Her wool coat was too fine for this place, better suited for church than prairie wind. She scanned the land for a face she'd only seen in a photograph. Jacob W. Alder, aged 36, of Alder Ridge Ranch, whose brief letters had promised strong coffee, sturdy shelter, and a place beside him. But there was no sign of a wagon, no horse, no man. Behind her the telegraph office was shuttered. Ahead, Bitterbrush stretched out, a town of 7 buildings and little else. A saloon, a general store, a church, 2 homes, a livery, and a one-room jail. No inn, no doctor. By noon, her coughing had worsened. She tried the general store, where the proprietor, Mrs. Elna Hook, eyed her with the thin-lipped suspicion reserved for newcomers. Etta asked about Mr. Alder. Mrs. Hook's face tightened. "He married all right," the woman said, "to a girl from over in Sweetgrass. Stronger stock." Etta held herself upright, even as the news slid into her like a rusted knife. She hadn't known how frail she looked until the letters stopped 3 weeks back. Hadn't known he'd stopped waiting. She slept that night in the hayloft above the livery, tucked under an old horse blanket, lungs aching and heart hollow. She did not cry. She cried all her tears in her mother's house, when the fever took her brothers one by one and her father let the banks strip their land bare. She had thought herself hardened, but this rejection came quiet and cold and final. Come morning, she borrowed a pail and washed herself in the river. She did not write home. There was no home left to write to. By the 3rd day, she took to mending garments at the back of the store in exchange for salt pork and thread. She kept her head low, eyes on her needle, coughing when no one could hear. The town watched her like a coyote watches a dying calf, curious but waiting for the stillness. On the 7th day, the man arrived. He rode down from the hills like a figure carved out of the stone itself. Broad-shouldered, tall, his beard thick and sun-bleached. His coat was buffalo hide and his boots still wet from river crossings. They called him August Finch. Owned 60 acres up in Blackthorn Hollow, said little, smiled even less. He came in for nails and flour and paused when he saw her. He didn't speak, not at first, just looked at her with those pale eyes, and she looked back, too tired to be ashamed. "Mrs." Hook leaned over the counter and whispered loud enough for her to hear, "That's August. Don't bother trying." But August didn't walk past. He watched Etta thread her needle, saw the way her hands trembled despite their precision. After a long minute, he set his sack of flour on the counter. "Who's she?" "Mail-order bride, got left." He nodded slow, then looked to Etta. "Can you cook?" She met his gaze. "I can read, I can sew, I can patch wounds. I can boil water for bone broth and keep a fire lit through the night." His eyes stayed on hers. "You cough like it's killing you." "It's not," she said, "not yet." He tilted his head. "You know how to tend goats." "No," she said. "But I can learn." He nodded once, turned to Mrs. Hook. "I'll need 2 sacks of feed and another blanket." Then he looked at Etta again. "Get your things." And just like that, she stood. The trail to Blackthorn Hollow rose in sharp switchbacks, stitched through wind-scoured hills and brittle pine. Etta rode behind August on his draft horse, her valise strapped behind the saddle, her hands clutching the rough leather of his coat. The sun dipped low, bleeding red through the clouds, and the cold deepened with every step into the higher country. August didn't speak, not to fill silence or offer comfort. He moved with the steady patience of a man long used to solitude. The kind of man who cut his wood in the fall, cured his own meat, and buried what needed burying without ceremony. When they reached the cabin, dusk had folded over the land. It was small but solid, rough-hewn timber walls, a stone chimney, smoke rising faint. A goat pen stood half-frozen behind it, and Alinta held kindling and pelts. He dismounted and helped her down without a word. Inside it smelled of smoke and iron. A single table, a potbelly stove, 2 chairs, no woman's touch, no lace curtains or soft linens, just warmth and order. "You can sleep on the cot for now," he said, setting her valise down near the stove. "Until we see how things work." She nodded and stood still, waiting to be told more. But August had already moved to the stove, tossing in more pine and setting a kettle to boil. "I'll trade room and food for work," he said. "This is no charity. You're not a guest." "I understand." "Then take off those boots. You'll clean in the morning. Wash what's dirty. Feed the goats at dawn. I'll show you how." She peeled off her boots with stiff fingers, and the heat wrapped around her like a second skin. Her lungs burned, but not from cold this time, from the sudden, unexpected reprieve. They ate boiled barley and salted jerky. He didn't ask about her past, and she didn't offer it. When she coughed, she turned away, ashamed. "You're lighter than you should be," he said after she'd finished eating. "You'll need more broth." She looked up. "I can make it." He nodded, then pointed to a shelf. "Dried roots, bone from last season. Use what you find." The days that followed carved a new rhythm into her bones. Mornings began before the sun rose, goats fed, fire stoked, water hauled from the creek and boiled clean. Her body protested, sore and weak, but she pushed through. She learned the land quickly. Learned August, too, in the spaces where words didn't reach. He never touched her, never so much as brushed her arm unless it was necessary. But when she dropped a bucket from a coughing fit, he lifted it without comment. When her hands cracked from scrubbing, he brought her a tin of rendered fat. And when she tried to sleep through a fever chill, he left a second quilt folded beside the cot. She mended his clothes, cleaned the rifle he left near the door, and read aloud from the 2 books he owned, a weathered Bible and an old almanac. Her voice was thin but steady, and sometimes, when the wind howled too loud, he'd let her keep reading longer than needed. By the second week, the hollowness in her chest began to ease, not vanish, but soften. Then came the storm. It rolled in from the north with no warning, a white roar that buried the valley in snow. The goats panicked, 2 went missing, and August was gone before she could stop him, rifle slung, coat tight. He returned hours later, soaked and shivering, 1 kid slung over his shoulder, the other dead in his arms. Etta didn't ask questions. She took his coat, set water to boil, and cleaned the blood from his hands while he sat at the table, silent and spent. "You shouldn't have gone," she said, voice low. "They were mine to lose." She poured broth into a tin cup and held it out. "You don't have to lose everything." For a long time, he didn't take the cup, just stared at her with something unreadable behind those pale eyes. Then slow, he reached for it. That night the storm raged, the roof groaned, the wind tore at the shutters like claws. Etta lay awake on the cot, clutching the extra quilt, watching the shadows shift on the ceiling. From across the room, August spoke. "You think you'll stay come spring?" She didn't answer right away. "I'll stay," she said, "if I'm welcome." "You are." A pause, the wind howled again. "Then yes," she whispered, "I'll stay." The thaw came slow. First, the snow turned to slush in the low valleys. Then the creek cracked free, its dark waters rushing hard over the stones. The days lengthened, and the trees shed their white coats in favor of brittle green shoots. The goats bleated louder, hungrier. Etta's cough, though not gone, loosened. Her chest hurt less each morning. The color returned to her lips. She no longer flinched at the cold. In the cabin, August had begun leaving small tasks undone, bootlaces left tangled, tools set askew. Etta took them up without a word. She sharpened his knife before he asked, salted the hides when he forgot. She started speaking more, if only in practical terms, and when he offered her the better cut of meat, she stopped declining. One evening, after tending a doe with a birth gone wrong, August sat at the table with dirt still under his nails. Etta handed him a tin cup of whiskey, something she'd found in a dusty bottle behind the stove. He took it and drank. His hands were rough. Her fingers brushed his when she pulled the cup away. "I heard about what happened down in Bitterbrush," he said, voice low. Etta folded a cloth over her lap. "What did you hear?" "That he left you standing on the platform, married someone else." She didn't look up. "Not much more to it than that. Man's a fool." She shrugged. He wanted someone strong. August tapped a knuckle against the table. "You built a fire in the middle of a blizzard, cleaned a birth that nearly killed a goat, learned the land in a season. That's strength." Etta met his eyes then. They weren't soft, but they weren't hard either. "I had to survive, that's all." He nodded. "That's enough." Later, she found herself alone outside, wind brushing through her skirts. The moon hung full over Blackthorn Hollow, casting the land in silver. She leaned against the fence, watching the goats settle, the mountain quiet all around her. Her fingers curled around the rough wood, and her breath came slow, measured. The stillness no longer frightened her. In April, the first stranger arrived. He came on foot, boots worn to the heel, and asked for shelter for the night. August offered him a place by the fire and half a tin of beans. Etta stayed quiet, watching the man's eyes, the way they lingered on the rifle leaning near the door. He asked too many questions, about the goats, the land, how far the nearest town was, whether August and Etta were married. August didn't answer. Neither did she. By morning, the man was gone, but a length of rope was missing from the lean-to, and one of the goats limped like it had been kicked. August spent the day setting traps farther up the ridge. When he came home, his expression was carved from stone. "There'll be more," he said. "That one was just looking." "For what?" "Easy things to take." Etta felt the cold again then, but not the kind that came from snow. The kind that lived in men's hearts when they saw a woman left alone. The next morning, she picked up the rifle. She'd never held one before, but her hands didn't shake. August watched her. "You planning on using that?" "If I need to." He nodded. "I'll show you how it kicks first." They spent the day in the clearing beyond the creek. He lined up old cans on a split rail and showed her how to brace her shoulder, how to breathe before the shot. Her first try missed wide, but the second knocked a can spinning. By evening, her aim was steady. "You've got good eyes," he said. "I used to thread needles in candlelight." He smiled then, not much, but enough. She began sleeping better after that, not because the world was safer, but because she no longer felt helpless inside it. And then, in early May, a letter came. Folded and stained, left by a passing trapper. No address, just her name on the front. Inside was a single line: "He's coming to find you." There was no name, no return. Etta read it once, then again. Her hands went still. She stood by the stove a long time before she showed it to August. He read it without speaking. "Who is he?" he asked finally. Her voice was quieter than the wind. "My father." The last time Etta had seen her father, she'd been holding her youngest brother's hand as he died. The fever had thinned the boy to bones and breath, and their father had stood at the door, unmoved. Not from cruelty, not exactly. Just the kind of man who believed death was the Lord's work and softness a sin. He'd told her she was too small to carry the family name, said she'd been a mistake since birth. When she ran away, she hadn't expected him to follow. Now, in the cabin at Blackthorn Hollow, August folded the letter and set it down like it might catch flame. How would he know where you were? I don't know, she said. I didn't leave word, but folks talk in towns. A girl like me gets noticed. August stared into the fire, jaw tight. Then we get ready. The days that followed took on a new sharpness. August added a second bolt to the cabin door, reinforced the shutters, cleared sightlines from the ridge to the valley. They practiced shooting each morning, Etta's shoulder bruising from the kick of the rifle, but her aim improving with every shot. At night, she slept with her boots beside the cot. Her cough returned, not from sickness, but from nerves, from the weight of memory pressing at her lungs. One night, as the wind cut cold again, she asked, "If he comes and I don't stop him, would you?" August didn't answer right away. "I don't believe in killing for another man's sins," he said, "but if he means to take what's mine, I won't ask twice." She didn't correct him. She didn't ask what he meant by what's mine. In some quiet part of her, she hoped he meant her. Not as a possession, as someone worth defending. By the end of May, the valley greened. Snow melt fed the creek and wildflowers broke through the loam. The goats fattened. The cabin smelled of soap and pine resin. Life pressed in again. But the shadow didn't lift. It was June 3rd when the man came riding. Etta spotted him first, a lone figure on a bay mare, cutting across the far ridge with purpose. No gear, no supplies. Just a long coat, a hat pulled low, and a shotgun strapped to his back. August stepped out beside her, lifted the rifle, and followed the man's path through the sights, his jaw clenched. That him? Etta didn't answer at first, just stared. Then nodded. His name's Ulyss Bell. August lowered the rifle but didn't set it down. You want to run? No. He nodded, then we stand. They waited. When the rider reached the edge of the clearing, he dismounted and walked the last 50 yards on foot. Slow, intentional, the way a preacher might approach a pulpit. August stood in the doorway, rifle in hand. Etta stood beside him. The man stopped 10 paces out. You're mine, Ulyss said, voice dry as sun-bleached bone. By law or blood. I'm not yours, Etta said. Her voice did not tremble. He laughed once, a hollow sound. You ran, stole from me. Shame's got a way of following a girl. I didn't take a thing that was yours. You took breath. August raised the rifle. That's far enough. Ulyss looked him over. You the new one, think you've tamed her. She's not an animal. Then why's she living out here like one? Etta stepped forward, just a step. Why did you come? To bring you home. There is no home, she said. Only you and a name. You used to beat us into silence. August's rifle never wavered. Ulyss tilted his head. I raised you. You raised your voice, she said. Not me. The silence that followed was long. The wind stirred. The goats rustled behind the cabin. Then Ulyss reached for the shotgun. The shot came before his hand touched the grip. August didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Ulyss dropped to his knees, the side of his coat torn open, blood blooming fast. Etta didn't scream. She walked down the steps, slow and sure, until she stood over him. You came all this way, she said. For what? He coughed, blood in his mouth. To remind you. I haven't forgotten. She knelt and took the shotgun, snapped it open, and tossed the shells into the dirt. Then turned her back on him. Let him die out here, she said to August. The land will bury him better than we ever could. They didn't speak of it again, not that night, not the morning after. August burned the blood-soaked dirt near the steps, and Etta swept the ashes into the wind. Ulis Bell's body was never found, though buzzards circled the ridge for days. The land had claimed him as it claimed all things too weak or cruel to last. June stretched into July. The air turned hot and dry, rattlesnakes slithered under rocks, and the goats grew restless. Etta learned to shear them herself, nimble fingers working through dense wool as August built a smokehouse near the creek. Their days filled with the small, relentless work of survival, but something between them had shifted. He began watching her longer, not like a man waiting for a mistake, but like one memorizing a truth he hadn't known he needed. And she found herself listening for his footsteps outside the window, feeling steadier when he was near. No words passed between them about what they were, but in every movement, in every chore shared beneath the heat, something rooted deeper. One morning, Etta found a pile of lumber beside the cabin. "What's this?" August scratched his beard, not quite meeting her eyes. "Building something." "She waited for you." Still, she didn't speak. "A real room," he said, "off the side of the cabin. So you don't sleep on a cot anymore. You don't have to do that." "I know." He didn't say more, just picked up a hammer and got to work. She helped him, hauling timber, measuring with twine, holding boards as he nailed them into place. He let her, didn't speak to her like a man doing a kindness, spoke to her like someone who knew she belonged beside him in the labor. The new room went up slow. Not just a bedroom, but a space with shelves and a window that faced the hills. She chose where it would go. He listened. By August, the frame stood strong and the floorboards creaked under her feet for the first time. "It's yours," he said. Etta stood in the center of the room, sunlight slanting across the raw wood. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses there, the marks of a life she'd earned, not begged for. "I never had a room that was mine," she said. August leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. "Then it's long past time." That night she moved her things from the cot to the new bed, rough spun sheets, a stitched blanket she'd finished by lamplight, the Bible from the shelf, worn and creased. She sat there in the dark, the quiet so thick it filled her lungs. And then she heard him at the door, a soft knock. "May I come in?" She rose, opened it, looked up into his face. "You may," she said. He stepped inside, stood close. Their hands brushed once, accidental or maybe not. He didn't touch her hair, didn't kiss her, just stood near. "I won't push," he said. "You've had enough of that." "I know," she whispered, "but I'm not afraid." He nodded once. "Good." The next morning he was already gone when she woke, out checking traps. But beside the bed, he'd left a tin cup filled with wild berries and a folded scrap of paper. "Strong things don't always roar," it read, written in his heavy hand. "Sometimes they just endure." She folded the note and placed it under her pillow. The wind picked up that afternoon. A dry wind carried the smell of smoke. Something was burning to the west. Etta stood on the porch and watched the horizon darken. August returned at dusk, his face grim. "Fire near Barlow's Pass," he said. "Too far now, but if the wind shifts, it'll come fast." They packed that night. Not to run, to fight it if it came. She helped him wet the perimeter with buckets from the creek, cleared brush, dug trenches. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. "You're not what I expected," he said once, breaking the silence. "Neither are you." They stood shoulder to shoulder as the smoke drifted closer. And when the fire came, they didn't run. The fire came like a charging beast, orange and wild, eating sky and scrub and shadow. It moved faster than any storm, carried on a shifting wind that made the trees moan before they burned. Etta tied a damp cloth around her mouth, eyes stinging, arms raw from the bucket line. August worked without pause, sweat streaking through soot on his face, his hands blackened with ash. They didn't speak, not once. The fire spoke enough. They beat back the edge of it with wet burlap sacks, circled the cabin in smoke, smothered sparks before they caught in the eaves. When the flames lunged close, August poured creek water over the roof. Etta kept the goats penned, wrapped in wet canvas. One died anyway, smoke in its lungs, legs trembling until they stopped. The heat bent the air into waves. The sky turned the color of rusted blood. They worked through the night. And in the still hour before dawn, the fire passed them by. The cabin stood, charred along the western wall, but still whole, the new room untouched. The land beyond was black. Hillside to horizon, the trees burned hollow, their trunks glowing red in the dark like ghosts with no skin. Ash fell like snow. They buried the dead goat near the creek. August said nothing during the digging. Etta stood beside him, her hand on the shovel, then on his arm. When it was done, they sat on the porch steps and watched the valley smoke. "You should have left," he said finally. "I did, once. It wasn't better." He looked at her, not with pity. "With weight, you've earned something more than this." "So have you." Silence settled again. It was a silence that didn't ache. In the weeks after, they rebuilt, patched the cabin wall, moved the goat pen farther east. August hunted deer deeper in the mountains, and Etta dried the meat on racks she built herself. The work went slower with only 8 goats left, but there was less to guard, less to feed. And the air, though thick with memory, began to sweeten again. People from Bitterbrush came late in the month, riders on skinny horses, news passed mouth to mouth. They saw the land blackened and asked if they'd survived it alone. "We had what we needed," August said. Etta stood behind him, arms crossed, face clean, eyes steady. One of the riders, a merchant from town, offered her a ride back. "If you're still looking for a husband," he said, half joking. "I found one," she replied, "and I kept the land too." After they left, August raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know that's what we were." "You built me a room," she said. "What did you think it meant?" He smirked. It was the first time she'd seen him smile with his teeth. "I thought maybe it meant you were staying." "I am." "Then it means whatever you want it to." She stepped close, her fingers brushing his calloused ones. "What do you want it to mean?" He looked down at her, the scar along his knuckle catching the light. "That you're not sleeping in that bed alone anymore." And they didn't marry, not right away, not with paper or preacher. But they shared a bed, a table, a rifle, and a life. Etta began carving her name into the doorframe of the new room, not with initials, with each passing year. A small line for every spring survived, every storm beaten back. Every moment she chose to stay. By the end of summer there were 3, and the 4th was coming. The 4th mark was carved deeper than the rest. Etta used the hunting knife August had given her last winter, bone-handled, heavy, the blade dulling from years of use. She carved slow, the weight of her hands steadier than it had ever been. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at the doorframe, each notch a testament to a life endured and earned. By late autumn, her belly had begun to show. Just enough that she could no longer carry the water pails without strain. August noticed first, though he didn't say anything until she set down the basin and caught her breath too slow. "I'll haul it," he said, not a question. Not a request. She wiped her hands on her apron. "I'm not broken." "No," he said, looking at her like she was something holy. "You're building." They spoke little of the child, not from fear, but reverence. As if naming it too soon might undo the quiet miracle they had been granted. Etta ran her hands over her stomach in the still mornings before dawn, sitting on the porch steps with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, feeling the land sleep beneath frost and silence. The fire had not returned. The goats birthed again. The trees along the creek grew new leaves, thinner and more brittle, but alive. When the snow came that year, it came soft, not the screaming blizzards she remembered from that first winter. Just a steady hush that covered the cabin, the fields, the graves. One night, as the wind rattled loose ice from the eaves, Etta woke to pain low and sharp. She rose without panic, lit the lantern, woke August with a whisper. "It's time." He didn't fumble, just nodded, stood, lit the second lantern, and laid down the blankets they'd prepared weeks ago. They had no midwife, no doctor, just boiled water and memory and faith. The labor was long. The kind of long that bends time into a prayer. She gritted her teeth through the pain, fingers clutching August's hand until blood rose beneath his nails. He said nothing, just held on. When the child came, the scream was thin, piercing, angry with life. A girl. Etta held her close, wrapped in linen that once belonged to August's mother, stitched over during long nights by firelight. The baby's eyes were dark. Her fingers curled into fists. "She's smaller than I hoped," Etta whispered. August knelt beside her. "She's stronger than she looks." They named her Wren. That winter the cabin was quieter. Not empty, never that again, but full of smaller sounds. The creak of the cradle, the tiny breath of a sleeping infant, the scrape of August's boots as he moved softer through the home they'd built. Etta no longer coughed in the mornings. When spring broke, the valley bloomed bright. The land wore its scars, but it was no longer bare. Shoots of green cut through the blackened soil. Birds returned to the trees, and the goats, stubborn and loud, climbed higher into the hills. One day, Etta took Wren in her arms and stepped out to the porch. She held the child close and looked out across Blackthorn Hollow, where the cabin stood like a promise against the sky. August came up behind her, arms circled around both of them. "She'll know it all," he said. "The hard, the holy, the fire and the silence." Etta nodded. "She'll know what it means to stay," she said. "And what it cost." Behind them, the doorframe held 4 marks, and a 5th waited to be carved.